What is up, everyone? We are back for the 2024 season of the Fight HQ podcast. Of course, I am Jason Floyd. That is the fighter, Pete Rogers Jr., here to break down UFC Vegas 84. As always, appreciate everyone tuning in for the show, whether you watch us live here on YouTube, watch us after the fact on YouTube, or check us out on the podcasting platforms. We very much appreciate it. Before we kind of get into DFS, let's get a round of applause for my guy, Pete Rogers Jr., going out there getting the dub last weekend.
Thank you very much. What's up, everybody? It's been a long hiatus from DFS and MMA content, and throughout that hiatus, I've just been trying to, grind in the gym and just trying to stay active. So when my MMA bouts fell through, I accepted a grappling bout. Definitely not in my expertise, you know what I mean? Like, it's not like accepting a striking match, but I'm out there trying to better myself every day and showcase all the hard work, and accepted the grappling match 2 weight classes up, and it was a good night. I was able to go out there and hit a throw, almost hit the throw perfectly, and then captured a rear naked choke and ended up winning the bout. So thank you guys for the support in the Discord channel, and of course, thank you, Jason, as always, for your continuous support throughout these years. And it was good. I'll tell you what, I got to be honest, Jason. I think I was scared shitless going out there for that rather than an MMA bout. Isn't that weird? I felt like I had no weapons, and my corner's yelling at me, don't elbow him. Like, I wasn't elbowing him. I was just trying to get my arms free. But it was scarier than an MMA bout for me, just because it's not my, I'm completely outside my comfort zone.
Yeah, I mean, and I think one of the things that obviously me and you have had a lot of private conversations the past couple of years, so I knew how anxious you were to get in there. I think that's probably got to play into it as well, of just getting back in competition.
I think that's what it was, and I'm actually happy I did it this way, because I'm in the back, and they actually couldn't find my opponent. So I don't know if anybody was out there tuning into the stream. I didn't even know we had a stream. Jason asked me, "You have a stream?" I was like, "I don't know," but. They were calling my opponent, and then they couldn't find him, and they ended up finding him. They had to skip the order and then go back to us. So I'm sitting there, I'm like, I hope this guy's here, because I just sold all these tickets, and I don't want to look like a fool. And then he was there, but it's just a wave of emotions and nerves. Definitely we were high just because of the absence. And then I tell you, as soon as my music played and I started walking out there, I was good. The back is the worst part about competition, and anybody who's competed just completely understands that.
Oh yeah, no doubt about it. But obviously, I knew what this meant to you to get back in there, and hopefully the MMA fight will be coming up here soon. And I'm gonna say the nerves will not be like it was last week.
No, Duke's like a punch, kick, knee, and elbow. At least give me something. Somebody's just put me in a bad spot. I just, you know what I mean? But yeah, it was definitely the right move to go out there and do that. So thank you guys for the support.
Well, of course, we are here to talk UFC Vegas 84. Of course, one of the things that me and Pete have talked about as we enter into 2024 is one of the things we do want to incorporate is a little more betting content into the show. Obviously, our core is always going to be daily fantasy sports with DraftKings and FanDuel, Prize Picks. I will tell you, there is one line on Prize Picks, and we're going to talk about here really soon. I did my spreadsheet last night, so I got to make sure these lines have not changed a little bit. But I'll say the one that stuck out to me the most, whether we can trust his fight IQ here, that 1.5 takedowns on Ankalaev is the one on Prize Picks that really stuck out to me, because, like, man, if Johnny Walker can just get it once. But we have certainly seen some times. We'll talk about Ankalaev and Johnny Walker, of course, a rematch. We remember we seen what happened the first time in that matchup. Of course, we have had one fighter miss weight today. Manel Kape missed weight, weighing in 129.5 for his matchup against Matheus Nicolau. Of course, that is a rematch. The first matchup was a split decision win for Nicolau, so we'll talk about that as we do go forward. But I will tell you, of course, we always love to start the show kind of talking about a little game theory in terms of DFS. And Pete, I think really where the game theory topic starts, for me at least, and I don't know maybe if you're different here, but it's about looking at that opening matchup of the main card between Brunno Ferreira and Phil Hawes. As I look at that matchup as that is a priority fight, just because of, like, it's a fight that I don't know if it makes it past 7.5 minutes.
Yeah, I definitely think it's important for all your lineups, because I think the under 1.5 makes a ton of sense. The power of Ferreira's tremendous. Do I think he's the most skilled guy? No, I don't. But I do think that he has the power to shut the lights off from Phil Hawes, and Phil Hawes has been knocked out a ton. And let me just tell you guys, like, to get knocked out so frequently is not common, okay? And that's not good. You know what I mean? Like, it sounds crazy, but the amount of times somebody's taken that damage, that's all the damage we've seen under the lights. That has nothing to show for what's going on in training. And it's really, really bad. Once somebody's chin's gone to that degree, it's very hard for me to trust that fighter. Despite how technically sound Phil Hawes is, despite how talented he is, it doesn't really matter. Just because of you don't know which shot, even if it's a small shot, how bad it's going to hurt him. So I definitely think that's a great starting point. I don't know as far as like confidence on who's going to win. I'll lean towards the guy with the healthier chin and Brunno Ferreira. But like that's a good spot. But be willing to, be sitting on the edge of your seat. As long as you have the correct exposure for that fight, I think you'll be set up correctly. For me, for roster construction, I actually am going to be looking at the top and trying to see, okay, which 9,000 fighter am I okay getting away from? And because of the weight miss and because of the weight class, maybe Manel Kape has fallen to my least favorite of the 9,000 options, even though I do think that he should go out there and put a stamp on this fight. And then it comes down to McGhee, Nolan, Ankalaev, Waldo, Acosta, and Silva. And, we'll get into them. But I definitely think it's a week where a lot of favorites make sense.
Yeah, I mean, when I was putting together my spreadsheet last night, the thing that really kind of stuck out to me was looking at those 9,000 options. And to me, it was more about who their opponent is than anything else. Like, look, I have a great relationship with Westin Wilson. Great dude. I just don't think he's at this level when it comes to the UFC. I mean, and I think he got in the UFC primarily because of his relationship with Stephen Thompson training there at the gym there. And I was telling Pete before the show, like, I'm primarily going to play cash games tomorrow. And, I'm always, when I'm playing cash games, it's about, okay, who is that 7,400 under fighter that I think can go 3 rounds and give me some points and even get has a low floor in a 3-round decision loss. And this was my thought process even before Manel Kape missed weight. I was thinking about Nicolau just in terms of that 7,200. But of course I do have a concern about him potentially getting knocked out there. There are some underdogs I will tell you that do intrigue me. Bautista is one of those underdogs that intrigues me. Taylor Lapilus, I think, is another sneaky underdog here. I know I'm going to let Pete save his super underdog. He's got his super dog of the show. I'm going to let you save that for when we get to that fight, because before the show, me and Pete were talking about various things, and he told me who I'm just going to call it your super dog of the week. Yeah. And, I mean, I think you're starting the year with the bold prediction.
Yeah, I think I am too. I could just be riding high from my performance last week and just completely shooting from the hip, but I feel a certain way, and if I feel a certain way, I'm going to say it. I've been wrong plenty of times. I mean, but I do think that sometimes you have to take the odds into consideration, and anytime it starts to get way too high and I don't agree with it, I'm going to look elsewhere, and that's kind of what's happening in this one matchup we'll get to. So from top to bottom, it's a solid card. But yeah, I mean, it's nothing crazy. There are some really volatile fighters with terrible chins, Johnny Walker, Phil Hawes. So yeah, I'm excited to see what happens.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Of course, appreciate everyone tuning in. If you do got any questions, pop those into the chat, or you can hit up in our Discord channel. Of course, that link to the Discord channel is in below. Of course, totally free to join. Great community that we have over there. Not just talking combat sports, talking all other types of sports as well. Of course, we have our DraftKings contest going on as well. The link to that contest is in the description below. And of course, be sure to hit that thumbs up button. We really appreciate it. And if this is your first time checking us out over here on Fight HQ, if you hit that subscribe button, whether you're watching us on YouTube or if you're checking us out on the podcasting platforms, that would be much appreciated. Now, Pete, let's get right into the main event. We got Ankalaev and Walker, the rematch here from last year. Ankalaev is over a 5-1 betting favorite, minus 550. Plus 385 for Walker. Ankalaev 9,400 on DK, $23 on FanDuel. Walker 6,800 on DK, $14 on FanDuel. I think there's things we can take away from the first fight, and I don't think my thoughts have really changed a lot since we saw this first meeting.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting bout, clearly, because You have a guy in Johnny Walker who I've been relatively low on within his career just because of the regional tape. I mean, my man gets rocked and dropped more than, not as much as Phil Hawes, but he's at that same level of volatility. And it's concerning for me because that's a lot of damage. And at the end of the day, when the MMA career is done, you're talking about the health of these fighters. And that's a lot to be getting dropped by shots. Granted, it is within the light heavyweight division, and everybody hits really damn hard with small gloves. But yeah, Johnny Walker surprised me. He's one of the fighters that I have a difficult time picking correctly. I thought that multiple people were going to be able to go out there and get rid of him. Ion Cutelaba was one of them, where I actually thought Cutelaba, despite his volatility, was just going to be able to, hit him with something or get him on the ground. But yeah, the pricing point of Johnny Walker at 6,800, it's so cheap that it makes him interesting, and I'm going to have Johnny Walker builds. But the way I do see this fight going is that despite the loss on Magomed Ankalaev's record, where he lost via submission to Paul Craig back in 2018, that was after dominating throughout that fight. And this is a guy who's shown absolute dominance inside the octagon. Did go to a draw, a split draw against Jan Blachowicz, still scored 84 fantasy points, landed 2 of 10 takedowns, had 11 and a half minutes of control time. This is a guy that blends takedowns together really well, has excellent striking, beautiful high kick, beautiful left hand. It does point me in the direction of Magomed Ankalaev, but I do think that there are crazier things than Johnny Walker just being so damn athletic and so sneaky with his approach that he can land a shot on Ankalaev and shut his lights off. But I'm going to be going with Magomed Ankalaev here at 9,400. Do I think the fight is necessary within your builds? No, I do not. 5-round nature tends to boost them within my exposures, but Magomed Ankalaev, for the most part, is a slower paced fighter, and Johnny Walker, under the tutelage of SBG, has kind of transformed into a more cerebral fighter. Yes, he'll pick up early finishes, but we have seen him go out there and take his time as he did against Anthony Smith. It went 15 minutes. I do think that there is a more patient approach for Johnny Walker. Obviously, if he wins, he's optimal at 6,800. But Magomed Ankalaev, being patient, as always, picking his shots, blending the wrestling, possibly just landing one shot to knock out Johnny Walker at 9,400. I think he's a very strong play, but I don't think he's a necessary play. So I'll be picking Ankalaev, sprinkling Johnny Walker exposure for the fluke flash knockouts, which I do think could happen. But yeah, I'd say about 80% of the time, Ankalaev walks away victorious.
Just went over to Prize Picks and see they've actually taken down that takedown prop that was for Ankalaev. And maybe a lot of people bounced on that one because when I saw that last night, my first thought was like, oof, that's kind of low. All he needs is 2 takedowns to go more. But that was there. The fantasy scores, I'll tell you, this week are pretty high all across the board over on Prize Picks. I mean, Ankalaev 115.5. Fight time is 9 3/4. I wouldn't say if I was going to play that, I would probably be more looking to go less than 9 3/4 and going more than 3/4. But and then just kind of looking at the betting side of this equation, obviously I don't want to touch the money line on this one at minus 550. You got to be looking at props. I mean, you can get minus 200 on Ankalaev to win by TKO, KO. I mean, look, if you want a little dangerous, I mean, you want to get a little extra juice, you can go Walker via TKO, KO plus 700. I mean, that to me is Johnny Walker's path to winning this fight.
Yeah, I mean, that's really his only path. I mean, I think for 25 minutes, the better fighter is clearly Ankalaev. Could struggle with the reach of Johnny Walker, which is a real difference maker, especially because Johnny Walker has been more patient, utilizing straight punches, front kicks a lot, knees up the middle. There's a path for Johnny Walker to win rounds and possibly win a decision, but for his entire career, we've really seen, despite him being more patient, he's a finisher. And I just outside of his KO TKO prop, I don't see how he finishes Ankalaev. So yeah, it'll be an Ankalaev play.
And I'm with you when it comes to DFS. I don't think this is a fight you have to prioritize just because, I mean, like you say this all the time, is the worst thing you want in a 5-round fight is a 3rd-round stoppage. And I think that would be your worst case scenario in this one. Plus, like, you know, that to me is where you start comparing the Ankalaevs to, you know, to Nolan, to Silva, McGhee, you know, and others, and say, do I want to get the Ankalaev? I mean, look, he could obviously use like grappling, but sometimes I have questions about his IQ inside the cage.
Yeah, you know, he almost kind of outsmarts himself sometimes and just overthinks. He seems like a guy who's just in his head a lot. And when you're cautious, it's the best way to move up the rankings. And clearly that's what he wants to do. And he's been trying to, and he's been getting snubbed left and right. But yeah, I do think that it's clearly, the odds are clearly reflective of Johnny Walker's durability. Like, there's no way that there should be a almost minus 600 for Ankalaev, whereas Johnny Walker's proven he's very, very good. But once you bring durability into the equation, then it starts to be like, okay, the betting market in Vegas clearly do not trust Johnny Walker's chin.
And something you also have to note about this one, that's being in the Apex, so it's a smaller cage, not the bigger cage like their first fight was in. The first fight was in a 30-foot cage. This one in a 25-foot cage there as well. Let's move over to the co-main event. Of course, we just mentioned a couple minutes ago that Manel Kape did miss weight for this one, missed weight by 3.5 pounds. If the commission does approve this fight and say he's healthy to go, it will be a catchweight matchup of 129 pounds. But, of course, this is a rematch. The first one, Nicolau won by decision a couple years ago. Nicolau is a plus 230 betting underdog, minus 280 for Manel Kape. I would imagine we might see some of those lines change here as we get through this. Manel Kape, $9,000 on DK, $19 on FanDuel, and Nicolau, he is $7,200 on DK and $12 on FanDuel, Pete.
Yeah, I think minus 250 makes sense for Manel Kape. I mean, was basically going upwards to minus 300, but with the weight miss, I would imagine that money's going to come in on Nicolau, just hoping that Manel Kape had an injury throughout camp, had a bad weight cut, had something go wrong. Tend to like, Manel Kape in this rematch. I liked him in the first bout, and it was a vet lesson that Nicolau was able to go out there and edge him out. I do think that the power is on display for Manel Kape in this matchup, and Nicolau's durability has been a little bit exposed. He's coming off a very tough loss, but I actually think that Manel Kape, despite the flyweight division, has some of the best finishing upside. When we saw Brandon Royval hurt Matheus Nicolau, I think a guy with the hands and the wrestling and the movement of Manel Kape is a very difficult fight in 2024. So I actually think Manel Kape's going to go out there and look very dominant. Felipe Dos Santos in his previous bout gave Manel Kape some fits, which will boost the confidence of Matheus Nicolau in this matchup, but largely due to the aggressiveness of Dos Santos and due to the short notice nature of the bout, where when fighters don't have much to lose and they go out there super aggressive, you can see anybody, give the veteran a difficult time. I mean, look at Lando Venata against Tony Ferguson, one of Tony Ferguson's toughest fights up until his complete demise within the division. And it's because guys on short notice are just going to go in there and bring intensity. In this matchup, if it does happen, I think Manel Kape on the outside is clearly the better fighter. And I think that he's going to walk away with a second or third round TKO over Matheus Nicolau. But yeah, 9,000, he's probably one of my least favorites, just because he's patient until he hurts you. And then when he does hurt you, he does smell blood in the water. So the betting market should be around minus 250 for Manel Kape. I don't hate the underdog selection of Matheus Nicolau, because I always say prioritize main event, co-main event underdogs. They are some of the best fighters on the entire slate. And Matheus Nicolau is 7-2 in the UFC. Not going to really hold that loss to Brandon Royval or Dustin Ortiz years ago against him. He's shown that he's, a well-rounded mixed martial artist, but I definitely think that Manel Kape gets his hand raised.
My one question about Manel Kape is, and I think this was potentially a golden opportunity for him here to really put himself right there in title contention. I mean, if people did not see, Brandon Moreno now is going to be taking on Brandon Royval as Albazi pulled out of the fight due to injury. I saw he had a tweet where basically he said he'd been dealing, I want to say, some neck injuries, and the UFC doctors basically said, yeah, we need to pull you from this matchup. But the one thing about Manel Kape is, like, what's his best UFC win? That's the thing that concerns me when you're talking about Ode Osborne, Zalgas, Dvorak, Felipe Dos Santos. I'm like, he doesn't have that marquee UFC win yet. I mean, the loss to Nicolau, the loss to Pantoja. I mean, nothing to, obviously Pantoja the best one guy in this division, but that to me is a little bit of a concern for me.
I mean, I can see what you're saying, but also, you know how matchmaking is. Sometimes the top guys don't want to fight a guy outside the rankings, or in the bottom half of the top 10, top 15, just because they know he's much more dangerous than what his ranking shows. And that could be the reason why Matheus Nicolau's best wins within the octagon. Obviously Manel Kape split decision, but Tim Elliott, Matt Schnell. So I think that, he's not like he's beating Alexandre Pantoja prior to the title victory or anything like that. And I think it's a nice clash for 2024. And this could be that big name for, not even a big name, an okay name to kind of get him some ranked opponents. So Manel Kape at 9,000 is a fine play.
Yeah, just look over Prize Picks. The line that stuck out to me last night on Manel Kape was a fight time minutes. It was 14.75. That now is down to 12.5. So, I talk about this on Prize Picks all the time, is sometimes you got to get on these early lines if you like something early on, because there's going to be people that go over there and kind of pound that line as well. Look, if you think he's going to get a stoppage win, going more than 85.5 fantasy score, let me make sure that has not changed. Let's see here. Yeah, he's still at 85.5. I think that may be one you could potentially target if you think he's going to go out there and get a stoppage victory in terms of this one. But I think it's going to be one of those things to kind of see, how does the market kind of view him missing weight, and we'll have to see whether or not this fight does go forward. But I would imagine we do see this fight here tomorrow. Next up, we got Jim Miller taking on Gabriel Benitez. Jim Miller, a minus 150 betting fair, plus 125 for Gabriel Benitez, $8,200 for Miller, $8,000 for Benitez, and $16 and $15 respectively. Benitez was a betting favorite at one point in this matchup, and just a crazy stat, because I saw this when I was just looking at something else. Jim Miller has never missed weight for any of his 43 pro MMA fights.
It's amazing. And I actually think that's how it should be, right? I mean, he's in the correct weight class. And that's where weight misses happen a lot, is guys trying to cut too much and get a significant weight advantage. And based on Miller's frame, he knew 55 was his home. I'm so impressed with Jim Miller's career, and even more impressed with what we've seen within the past couple of years. I mean, he's just been on a complete tear going back to 2021, knocking out Eric Gonzalez, Nicholas Mota, subbing Donald Cerrone, going the distance with Alexander Hernandez, knocking out Jesse Butler. So clearly, all those finishes are against volatile opponents, some short notice replacements. But just because you're fighting guys that are, short notice replacements, it is difficult to get finishes. You know what I mean? Like, this is an MMA bout. You don't see finishes all that often. Some fighters just can't find a finish. And Jim Miller's aggressiveness on the feet, he actually really looks improved. He's always been a hard kicker, hard calf kicker, throws a beautiful straight left hand, has submission grappling to fall back on. For a long time, battled with Lyme, still battles with Lyme. But I'll tell you what, it doesn't seem to be affecting him as it used to. I don't know if he's changed something, altered something, learned better ways to deal with it, but he used to gas out quite a bit for the division. And I haven't seen that energy depleting from him as much as it used to. I mean, going 15 minutes with Alexander Hernandez is somewhat impressive, because a couple years back when Hernandez was breaking onto the scene, he looked like he was going to finish everybody. I mean, he finished Dariush in a short notice call up. But this is a guy in Jim Miller who I just think is clearly riding momentum. And that UFC 300 almost guaranteed call for him, I think, is awesome. I hope he's not overlooking Gabriel Benitez, because he still has to go out there and perform. But Benitez is an older vet as well, but a guy whose durability is much more in question than Jim Miller. Benitez could go out there and win a decision, sure, but like getting knocked out from Onama, Billy Q, Sadiq Youssef, Andre Feely. I'm going to side with Jim Miller here despite the pick'em odds at 8,200. Is there a world where Benitez goes out there and kicks the crap out of Jim Miller and lands some big left hands? Yes, but the momentum and the activity in the octagon is going to make me side with Jim Miller. This is a pivotal fight for the slate, in my opinion. The only way this fight isn't a part of the optimal is if somehow both vets turn it into a war and survive, and it goes 15 minutes. So, large majority of your lineups, I think probably 75 to 80% of your lineups should have exposure to this bout. Basically the same as you should have for the Ferreira and Phil Hawes fight, but with the small chance that it does go 15 minutes, possibly pivoting away from this fight is a way to get different. I don't hate it. The pick's going to be Jim Miller, and I think a lot of people are in agreement that Jim Miller's looked career best lately.
Yeah, I mean, I think just looking at it, I agree with everything you said there about, it's a fight you got to seriously look at. You look over at Prize Picks, most of the props all the props in this fight are over on the Benitez side. I may be looking more at that fight time of 8.5. Maybe I would lean going less on in terms of that one. And I mean, look, I think, looking from the betting side, I mean, I might throw, we talk about maybe throwing some sprinkles on some things. Yep. May find that sprinkle Jim Miller wins round 1 is a sprinkle I'd be looking at.
He's very aggressive. I just wonder if he comes out too aggressive against the vet who's not a short notice call-up. Okay, so like short notice call-up, Jason, right? Mm-hmm. I have a fight, week of the fight. We just get somebody to accept the fight. You know that as a vet, you got to make them as uncomfortable as possible. Show them that they don't belong, and I think that's why it's boosted his finishing totals. I just think against a vet where he's dangerous, he's going to have some levels of respect because you do not want to get clipped by Gabriel Benitez.
Yeah, I mean, looking at over on Best Fight Odds, looking at various books, ranges anywhere from plus 270 to plus 310 for Miller to win round 1. Maybe if you want to live a little crazy, Jim Miller wins by unanimous decision, plus 500. Maybe that you want to throw a little sprinkle in terms of that. Appreciate the super chat there from Liker. We always appreciate those super chats. So if you want to shoot a question in, be sure to let us throw it in there for you. Let's move over to our next matchup. We got a matchup between Ricky Simón and Mario Bautista. Ricky Simón is a minus 190 betting favorite, plus 160 for Bautista. Bautista, 7,600 on DK, 13 on FanDuel. Simón, 8,600 on DK, and $17 on FanDuel, Pete.
Yeah, so you guys know I love Ricky Simón. Like, Ricky Simón is I would love to coach Ricky Simón. Like, I want those types of guys a part of my camp because he's so damn talented and he's a pace pusher. Whenever you have a fighter who can just push a tremendous pace, you can take somebody who's excellent and just bring them to mediocre level because you're breaking them with pace and pressure. And that's what we've seen him do when he's victorious. When he's a little patient on the outside, that's when he can get caught, right? Like the Song Yadong fight in general is just a very difficult fight. You're talking about Song, who has great takedown defense, has phenomenal power for the division, is a part of a wrestling camp where Team Alpha Male, everybody's a Ricky Simón, basically. So he's training with, Ricky Simón type of fighters on the daily. It was just a very difficult bout. And despite my love for Ricky Simón, I did pick against them there where I like Song Yadong quite a bit. If you look at their resumes, you can clearly see Ricky Simón has fought tougher competition than Mario Bautista. Now, the odds do not reflect how talented Mario Bautista is. This is a slight step up in competition for Mario Bautista. The previous matchup against Damon Blackshear was not his best. It was not his best at all because he wasn't able to find much success with his takedowns. He's a good grappler. He's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu brown belt or black belt under the tutelage of John Crouch, part of the MMA lab, mixing in work with, as you told me prior to the show, Sugar Sean O'Malley, main sparring partners, which is excellent. But you saw where Damon Blackshear can push a pace and wrestle and make you work and scramble and arguably won that bout or made it a lot closer than a unanimous decision against Mario Bautista. I think that the chink is clearly in the armor for Mario Bautista where it's like, okay, it looks like a guy in Ricky Simón should go out there and pick up a very dominant win by mixing in his grappling. On the feet, though, I do worry that Simón can get caught with something big, an explosive knee, an uppercut, something that Mario Bautista has, landed in the past. This is a competitive fight, though. So when it's a competitive fight, I tend to not get too crazy with my exposure. Hand building, I can already tell you in my hand builds, I like Ricky Simón a lot. He's just there. He's a guy that has excellent takedowns, good power, good grappling. And I think this is a buy low spot for him. And in a weird salary range where maybe a lot of people are going to pivot away for him, I like him here at 8,600. With all that being said, I think that Mario Bautista, to me, this is a better co-main event than what the actual co-main event is. I don't think Matheus Nicolau is going to look all that competitive against Manel Kape. I could be completely wrong. But for me, Ricky Simón Bautista should be the co-main. And I always say prioritize main event, co-main event underdogs. I'm treating this matchup as it is the co-main. And Bautista is a phenomenal underdog to get behind.
Yeah, I mean, my one concern about Mario Bautista in this one would be about the wrestling aspect of this one. And that's where, when I look at the ownership projections, that's why, you look at Ricky Simón and saying, man, he does have that chance to be a slate breaker just because of that grappling, that advantage that he potentially has in this one. But I obviously love the camp that Mario's with. That room at the lab of 135ers is insane. It's one of his training partners is earlier on in this fight card, Marcus McGhee. That 135 room is amazing at the lab, and of course, Sean O'Malley does part of his training lab, but does his training at his own gym as well. So obviously, they're all getting ready for matchups here. But looking over at Prize Picks, don't really love the two props that are there are Ricky Simón. I would probably say if I was looking at the betting side, I might be looking at either Simón or Bautista to win, be a decision this one. I do think this thing does tip if we go 15 minutes. By the way, hat tip to Woody over in the chat. Let us know that Manel Kape has been fined 25% of his purse. The fight is on, so kudos to Nicolau's manager for getting more than 20%.
Oh, yeah. They want this fight, especially in a co-main spot. You got a Jason Floyd type of manager, you're going to get at least 20.
Bro, we start. Hey, look, you miss weight by 3+ pounds. We might start negotiation at 40%.
I like it. You can always go down. That's what my father always told me.
You can't go up.
Yeah, you can't go up. So you can always go down. You can work your way down, but don't undercut yourself.
Yeah, I have had some managers tell me some kind of classic stories in terms of negotiations. And they say, when you know the opponent, and he goes, if you might know how bad they need money, you might be able to get a bigger percentage of that purse than you think you can. Next up, let's move over to the opening matchup of the main card. Of course, on ESPN Plus, you got Brunno Ferreira taking on Phil Hawes. Ferreira minus 130 betting fair, plus 110 for Hawes. Hawes, 7,900 on DK, $15 on FanDuel. And for Brunno, he's 8,300 on DK and $16 on FanDuel, Pete.
Yeah, I think it's pretty obvious that the under 1.5 is appropriately lined at minus 250. You got a really heavy hitter in Brunno Ferreira here who, despite losing the matchup early, chinned Gregory Rodriguez. And Gregory Rodriguez has some similarities to Phil Hawes when it comes to volatility and durability. Phil Hawes, though, is just on a completely different level, whereas you just don't know which shot, big, small, is going to hurt him, rock him. And then prior to that, he used to be a gasser. He used to be a guy that would gas. So you'd have somebody who isn't that durable now is a sitting duck because he's tired. And then that's a terrible combination when you're going up against a power puncher in Brunno Ferreira. I think that Ferreira is clearly the fighter I'm going to be siding with at 8,300 because of those question marks and red flags that I talked to about Phil Hawes. Now, some little interesting tidbits is that Phil Hawes has actually started to go train down in Philly with the guys of Joe Pyfer and Sean Brady. And, I don't think it's ever been a skill thing. I don't think it's ever been a skill thing. If you look, you see what's happened to Phil Hawes. I will probably pick him in a skill challenge over almost everybody he's gone against. Ikram Aliskerov, Roman Dolidze, Deron Wynn, Chris Curtis, Dawkins, Imavov, Jacob Malkoun. We've seen some glimmers of his potential. Look at what he did to Nasruddin Imavov. It was a majority decision. 4 of 7 in the takedown department, 11 minutes of control time. He can clearly go out there and just out-wrestle the hell out of Brunno Ferreira, who's a one-trick pony, and that one trick tends to be where Phil Hawes struggles. So I don't really know how this fight's going to go, but I'll tell you that I'm going to side with the guy with less red flags, and that's Brunno Ferreira. Totally willing to be wrong here, but I think you absolutely have to have this fight. I don't see how this fight's not optimal, unless, of course, a foul or something like that occurs. But, I'm going to almost lock in this matchup, a part of my lineups.
The thing for me is just, can I trust Phil Hawes' chin?
No, definitely not. You just got to be able to – if you take that one red flag away, I pick this guy a lot. I probably have this guy lined. I have Phil Hawes lined at 8,600. Mm-hmm. But because of the durability, I mean, it's bad.
Oh, no. Look, I'm with you there as well. I mean, that's why. I mean, I haven't seen what the exact number is. I gotta imagine it's probably juiced what the under 1.5 rounds is on this fight.
Yeah, it's minus 250.
Yeah, you knew that thing was gonna be juiced. I mean, like, I don't love parlaying props like that, but
that seems, yeah.
I mean, just because it can be dangerous when you start doing that.
Yeah. And because what should happen doesn't happen. You know what I mean? Like, and that's the game of MMA. What should happen all the time is not what happens.
Yeah.
Because it was Paddy Pimblett, Tony Ferguson, and that killed me with my parlay, or that killed me with my bet, because I just completely thought that he was going to get the finish. So close to getting it. But then he taxed himself so much trying to go for the finish. Now it becomes a stretched out fight,
Yeah, me and my buddies were talking about this because obviously in Florida, sports betting is not legalized with the Hard Rock app, and we were talking about betting with MMA, and buddy's like, hey, you remember that guy that hit the 14 player parlay in NFL, the anytime touchdown?
Yeah.
And they're like, could that ever happen in MMA? I'm like, I go, if you hit a 14 leg parlay in MMA, just retire from betting. Just retire.
Yeah, I mean, if it's money line, I can see it happen, and that's still really difficult. But if you did a 14 winning method parlay, my man, I don't know how the hell you did that. That's crazy.
Yeah, I would say you just hit a lottery ticket and time to retire.
Yeah, for sure.
I can only imagine that dude that had that 14er and he was waiting on Monday night. Like, how often that Monday was he like, should I just cash this out? Should I just cash this out?
You know damn well he didn't pick that. That's his girlfriend who picked that, because she probably picked all this random shit to happen, and it worked. Because when you put logic behind bets, a lot of times you just, you overthink it. Yeah, you overthink it, and that's why when you play too cute, you lose. So when money line, despite the hefty price tags, is definitely the way to go.
Samuel, appreciate it. Super chat. We'll get to your questions right there at the end of the show. Next up, we got a heavyweight matchup. We got Cortes-Acosta taking on Arlovski. Arlovski is a plus 500 betting underdog, minus 800 for Cortes-Acosta. Acosta 9,500 DK, $21 on FanDuel, and for Arlovski 6,700 on DK, $9 on FanDuel. And man, Pete, it is 2024. And Arlovski is still doing this damn thing at the highest level.
Arlovski's doing it, and I've lost my mind, because guess what? I do not like these lines at all. At all. And I'll tell you what. Waldo Cortes-Acosta, priced at 9,500, despite being a ballooned minus 800 favorite, is ridiculous. If you want to put the money line next to the DFS salary, it does look like Waldo Cortes-Acosta's, at I would say an okay price tag, given what Vegas is thinking. I'll tell you what, though, go back and watch his fights. He throws a ton of volume, which is fine, but I just don't think the guy's good, and I don't think a lot of people within his division are good. So what? Like, Arlovski gets chinned by a former teammate in Dontel Mays despite looking fine, and now everybody's off of him. He loses 2 fights to 2 former teammates, Dontel Mays and then Marcos Rogerio de Lima. And now everybody just completely forgets the Jake Collier, Jared Vandera, Carlos Felipe, Chase Sherman, decision wins. Tanner Bozer, Felipe Lins. Now everybody thinks that Arlovski's completely washed. He's been washed for 10 years. I don't know how he's picking up wins, but he is. And, if you go back and you watch Cortes-Acosta's regional tape, they claim he's this pro boxer and that he's a phenomenal striker. He's been knocked out twice in pro boxing. And I'm not talking about standing, getting TKO'd. I'm talking getting knocked out. I don't know. I could be riding high, man, but I'm telling you what. I think Andrei Arlovski picks up his first finish in 15 years or whatever the last time you got to finish. I think that Arlovski, he's an underdog where it shouldn't make any sense. And probably what actually is going to happen is this becomes a 15-minute sloppy heavyweight bout where the likelihood is Arlovski loses the decision. But on a week where I don't like a lot of underdogs, I need somebody to survive. And when you have a 23-16-1 record in the UFC, you've seen it from everybody. He's seen plenty of Waldo Cortes-Acostas throughout his reign in the heavyweight division, throughout his reign in his entire career. He still trains at American Top Team. He's sparring with some of the best fighters in the world. He's got the preparation, the team behind him. I think the entire market is off on Arlovski. And if I look like a fool, I'm okay with it because I always say prioritize main event, co-main event, underdogs, or underdogs in women's MMA and heavyweight MMA. And Arlovski's a guy I'm getting behind. I think that he can actually just do enough to survive 15 minutes to possibly win a decision. But I'm also not sold on Cortes-Acosta's chin. So yeah, I mean, like even when he gets out volumed, like he can match. Like look at these numbers. Chase Sherman, he threw 222 significant strikes. Carlos Felipe, 172, 133 against Vandera, and 164 against Jake Collier. Let's say it goes 15 minutes. 158 Cortes-Acosta threw against Vandera. 150 against Rogerio de Lima. There's a world where Andrei Arlovski wins a decision and priced at 6,700 is just necessary. Like I would much rather in cash take that punt in hopes that he just can win a decision where I can spend up and get the best possible lineup. So yeah, I'll be back in Andrei Arlovski here. I don't like Cortes-Acosta and I don't like the odds.
May 23rd, 2015.
Oh boy, what are you going to do if I hit this? Because the entire market, what's the odds on this? I'm going to find it right now. Arlovski to win via KO, plus 1,200. That is crazy.
Because I was going to mention another prop to you. You want to throw a little sprinkle here? By the way, Arlovski win via decisions plus 1,200, but Arlovski finds himself in these split/majority decisions
all the time.
28-1.
Holy moly. All I'm saying, right? He could go out there and get hit with a right hand and crippled as he did against Dontel Mays. Mm-hmm. But Dontel Mays blended a slip as Arlovski was coming in, and he just did not see it. Okay, and that's how a lot of knockouts happen. He didn't see it. Prior to that, though, Arlovski landed a couple sneaky combinations on Dontel Mays where it looked like Dontel Mays got stumbled a little bit and staggered. And what I see from Waldo Cortes-Acosta is a blitzer. So, like, he'll sit on the outside, struggled for the majority with dealing with leg kicks. But then when he does decide to go, I can actually see him running into a big shot and getting dropped against the old man Arlovski, who everybody's completely off against. And by right, look at this should not happen. Arlovski should go out there and lose based on how Vegas is projecting it. Mm-hmm. I just think that there's some value on Arlovski here when you got Jake Collier, Vandera, Felipe, and Sherman, Tanner Boser, and Felipe Lins, all with similar skills to Cortes-Acosta, and they couldn't drop him and finish him.
Yeah, and I talk about this in cash of finding those fighters that you think can go 15 minutes. If you think Arlovski that guy, it's a great salary relief to go out there and get some of those fighters that you want. And then I think the next matchup is another matchup that I think you got to look at as potentially as a GPP priority. You got Parsons as a plus 110 betting underdog, Matthew minus 130, 8,400 for Matthew on DK, 17 on FanDuel. Parsons is 7,800 on DK, $14 on FanDuel. And this is the fight, and I've heard some other people kind of talk about this week that it's a fight I kind of have circled just because I'm thinking we got a high probability of someone walking away with a stoppage victory here, Pete.
Yeah, I think that it's a high-scoring affair. And when I was thinking about Semelsberger's fights within the UFC, he tends to land that shot, and he's landed a knockdown, and so many knockdowns in his fights. It's so damn impressive. Knocked down Alex Morono, knocked Jake Matheus down 3 times, knocked Jeremiah Wells down twice, Uros Medic down 1 time despite losing that. Didn't knock down AJ Fletcher, didn't knock down Chaos Williams, knocked down Jason Witt and Carlton Minus. I mean, that's just ridiculous. You don't knock that many people down unless you just have ungodly power. And Matthew Semelsberger here at 8,400 has ungodly power. His Achilles heel is clearly his wrestling and his grappling. But we've seen him go out there and land takedowns. He took Jake Matheus down, who's a very solid grappler. Took him down 3 of 5 times. Had 4 minutes of control time. The issue is if he's put on his back. And sometimes he's just on his back. That's where a guy can have a ton of success. That's why Preston Parsons is a slight underdog because of his skill set and the stylistic matchup. He is a very talented grappler, has good top control, landed 4 of 6 takedowns against Evan Elder. Evan Elder's a lightweight, but that was a short notice fight. Landed 3 of 11 takedowns against Trevin Giles. In those fights, he had 5 minutes of control time and 7.5 minutes of control time. We've seen Semelsberger get put on his back from AJ Fletcher and various other fighters, Jeremiah Wells especially. So, I think he can get just completely blanketed for 15 minutes or possibly submitted? Absolutely. We've seen that Achilles heel come time and time again. But on the feet, I do think that there is a wider gap in skill between Semelsberger and Parsons that is going to make me pick Matthew Semelsberger here at 8,400. Despite him being just a big, heavy right-handed fighter, and having some red flags about him, I do see that Preston Parsons looks uncomfortable, shoots early and often, and then when he's unsuccessful or reversed, that he'll be there to be hit. His submission attempts for Preston Parsons are impressive. 5 submission attempts against Evan Elder and 3 against Trevin Giles, making this one of the most compelling fights on the card. 8,400 Semelsberger, 7,800 Preston Parsons. I view this as a priority for DFS lineups, but I'm going to be picking the big, heavy-handed striker in Matthew Semelsberger to stuff some takedowns and knock Preston Parsons out cold.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those ones on the betting side, I'm kind of looking at inside the distance type props, wins by TKO, KO. That's where I'll be kind of targeting on the betting side of this one. And I kind of would say, looking at the fight time, 10 minutes, I would go less than 10 minutes on this one. And just like Pete said, I think you got to prioritize this for DFS. Next up, we got Marcus McGhee taking on Gaston Bolanos. Bolanos plus 210 betting underdog, minus 260 for McGhee. McGhee 9,100 on DK. 19 on FanDuel, and for Bolanos, he's 7,100 on DK and $12 on FanDuel, Pete.
Yeah, so I was kind of contemplating if I was going to make this my bold call of the week, and I'm not. I'm not. I'm going to be siding with Marcus McGhee here, but let me kind of get you into my thought process where, you have minus 250-ish for Marcus McGhee, plus 190, plus 200 for Gaston Bolanos. If this is a kickboxing fight and there are no takedowns, then I think this fight is lined much, much closer. I think that even Gaston Bolanos, it could be pick'em odds. So is this going to actually be a blended arts fight where wrestling is going to be involved? Or is Marcus McGhee going to just be content with keeping it on the feet, which will actually open the door for Gaston Bolanos to leg kick and possibly win a decision? I think that the finishing upside is clearly on Marcus McGhee's side. He has wrestling in his back pocket to use it against Gaston Bolanos, who is a very high-level kickboxer, making the crossover into MMA for several years now, but it takes a while. Being under the tutelage of Team Alpha Male has helped Gaston Bolanos, but I still see kickboxing tendencies that are going to take some time to get out. Marcus McGhee has great, movement, good power, good combinations, clearly the better mixed martial artist. it just comes to what happens if Marcus McGhee is so accustomed to dominating people on the feet that Gaston can defend just enough takedowns that this does become a kickboxing fight where Marcus McGhee's volume is just not enough to keep up with Gaston Bolanos and possibly win a come from behind decision. Definitely possible. 7,100, you're talking about a guy in Gaston Bolanos who's very young. If you do not like the Arlovski punt, then I think that the uncommon punt for Gaston Bolanos to win a kickboxing decision at 7,100 does make a lot of sense. This is a week where I do not like underdogs, so I'm trying to put my mind and wrap my head around what's going to happen. But I actually do think that Marcus McGhee, whether he hurts Gaston on the feet or Gaston just throws a sloppy or a lazy leg kick, and McGhee's just going to counter and get on top and utilize his complete tool set within this bout. So I'm still picking Marcus McGhee at 9,100, but there are some chunks of my lineups where I'm getting to Gaston Bolanos and not getting to Andrei Arlovski. I do think that he's a very unpopular underdog despite the true kickboxing skills that he possesses.
I think one of the questions I would have on Marcus McGhee, because we have not seen at the UFC level, is what if this fight does make into a third round? What does he look like in a third round? I mean, I think if you're looking at kind of presenting both sides of the equation here, is obviously we've seen him be a finisher in the UFC with first and second round victories, but that would be a little bit of concern to me if this thing does go into the third round. If you look at the prize picks, 9.75 for a fight time, 100.5 fantasy score for McGhee, and 40.5 significant strikes there. I would say this, man, I kind of wonder if maybe going less than 40.5 significant strikes, maybe potentially the play, in terms of this one. But I do like Marcus McGhee go out there, and I always, especially when you have fighters fighting on the same card that train together on the regular, that's always one thing that sticks out to me. And like I mentioned about earlier, that room at the lab when it comes to 135-pound fighters is just a great room. Next up, we got Basharat taking on Lapilus. Lapilus is a plus 225 betting underdog, minus 275 for Basharat. Basharat, 8,900 on DK, 20 on FanDuel. And for Taylor, he is 7,300 on DK and $11 on FanDuel.
Yeah, tricky fight, right? Like, I'm not sure which Basharat brother I think is better. I don't know if Farid is the better brother or if Jabed Basharat's the better brother. I think that they both possess well-rounded skills. Farid seems to be a more grappling-oriented fighter, whereas Jabed seems okay to stay on the outside and kickbox a little bit more. Farid picking up a win against Amon Blackshear is pretty damn impressive in his debut. 3 of 6 in the takedown department, 5.5 minutes of control time against a very, very talented grappler and wrestler. Cutting right through Clayton Rodriguez in the first round, landing 2 of 5 takedowns, 3 minutes of control time in a 4-minute victory, scoring 111 against Clayton Rodriguez. Super damn impressive. I think he's at a price point where a lot of people don't necessarily want to put him in their lineups because the 9,000 options look to have more finishing upside. Taylor Lapilus is a guy that I think he's okay. I think he's okay, and I think his tendency is to go the distance. Throws with okay volume, decent accuracy, seems to be he seems like he's going to have, he's going to be a step behind in every facet of the game. I just see some of these losses within his career. They're not that impressive. I mean, losing to Eric Perez, that's a really long time ago, but getting a second shot in the UFC and going 15 minutes with Callan Loughran, scoring 64 fantasy points. There's just no eagerness to his game. There's no like, I don't know. He does not go for the kill. There's no hunger behind anything he does, in my opinion. Farid Basharat is just a guy who's going to work. He's a pace pusher, excellent grappler, solid enough striker. I think his volume is just going to be too much for Taylor Lapilus. Lapilus has an excellent record, so he could make himself be one of the most popular underdogs on the slate. And this could be a more competitive fight than what I'm giving credit for. But I think that Farid Basharat at 8,900 is a very solid play, and he's going to pick up another victory.
Yeah, this is one of the ones looking for an underdog potential punt play. Taylor was one of those ones that I was looking at in terms of this one. And of course, Basharat's the only one that does have a takedown prop over on Prize Picks right now, and that's 3 takedowns. I mean, it's a big number.
That's a lot. Yeah, that's a lot, man. You need 4 to make some money. So, I'd probably pivot away from that, to be honest. I do think that he needs to do that because on the outside, Taylor is a little tricky. Farid will have success, but anytime you're talking about somebody who trains at Extreme Couture, they're going to have excellent wrestling and grappling and have a good strategy behind them. So I like Farid.
Let's go to our next matchup. We got our biggest betting favorite on this card, a 10-1 betting favorite. That is Gene Silva taking on Westin Wilson, who is a 6-1 betting underdog. Silva's $9,600 on DK, $22 on FanDuel, and for Westin Wilson, $6,600 on DK and $8 on FanDuel, Pete.
Yeah, so this fight came down to me like, who do I like more? Do I like Gene Silva more, or do I like Waldo Cortes-Acosta more? And it's clearly Gene Silva because I actually can see Andrei Arlovski winning, and hence why I picked him. Westin Wilson, karate specialist under the tutelage of Stephen Thompson, but he's not really good. I just see him, being able to get hit. Listen to an interview or read an interview about him wanting to utilize his grappling more in this fight against Gene Silva, which, I mean, that is not their strong suit, a part of that camp at all. It could be a sneaky way to avoid the power of Gene Silva in hopes to tax his gas tank, because coming into the Contender Series, Gene Silva looked like a guy who tired over time. But being a part of the Fight Nerds team, I think their preparation is excellent. They're one of the teams on the rise, and I've been pretty big on them. Very very big power for Gene Silva. Well-rounded skill set. I think he's going to hurt Westin Wilson really badly and end up knocking him down at least once en route to a TKO KO finish. It's just he better not get behind on the scorecards or lose a round or two, because at that price point, you can't afford him to go out there and have a slow start at 9,600. So Gene Silva is clearly the play for me. Westin Wilson is a big featherweight, very long. Perhaps he can just dance on the outside and win a 15-minute decision, but I do not see it. I'll account for it in like a small portion of my lineups, but Gene Silva at 9,600 seems like a free square this week.
Yeah, I mean, that price point is the thing that really, I mean, to me is, if you're going to put him in your lineup, I feel like you're starting with him, and then you're working the rest of your lineup together.
Yeah, that's definitely what you have to do, because salary becomes difficult and restrictive at 9,600.
Yeah, it's just one of those things where I just look at that price tag and go, man, you need that first round finish. And by the way, on Prize Picks, 4 minutes is the fight time for Gene Silva in terms of this one. Next up, we got Nolan and Mata. Mata plus 275 betting underdog, minus 350 for Nolan. Nolan 9,200 DK, 20 on FanDuel, and for Nicholas, he is 7,000 on DK and $10 on FanDuel.
Yeah, I mean, Nicolas Mota coming from Extreme Couture, a guy that I wanted to materialize into the UFC, but it just does not happen. It hasn't happened at all. Swings with bad intentions, but telegraphs a lot of his shots. His durability is awful. His fight IQ is somewhat bad as well. If you look on his box scores, it's ugly. Getting knocked out against Jim Miller, picking up a win over Cameron Van Camp, getting knocked out brutally against Manuel Torres, and clearly losing decisively to Trey Ogden with that odd stoppage despite him defending the choke. He was a fighter I circled in possibly getting behind and talking myself into an underdog shot, but I almost think that he's just not built for this, because when the matchmakers and his management are picking matchups, this is not the fight that I would be accepting or picking, because Tom Nolan's massive for the division, really, really hot starter, has solid Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu as well, but he's just very dangerous. And given Nicolas Mota's durability question marks, you can't be putting him in there with dangerous people. You should be putting him in there with, that's like the previous matchup made sense, going up and trying to pick up a victory over Trey Ogden. Not a finisher, really. Tom Nolan's a finisher, and I think that he's going to pick up a very quick finish over Nicolas Mota. This is his UFC debut, so the bright lights could possibly get to him, but this seems like a kid who's ready, big for the division, has a lot going for him, and Nicolas Mota, unfortunately, besides being a part of Extreme Couture, does not have locks going for him. But in an exchange of hooks, Mota could have the tighter hook and land it on Nolan and knock him out, but I think that's a less than 20% chance. So I'll be siding with Tom Nolan pretty significantly.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Tom Nolan was one of the ones that, when trying to get away from some of those other 9,000 options, he was the guy that I was looking for in terms of their opening match. We got Joshua Van taking on Felipe Buns plus 210 betting underdog, minus 260 for Van. Van 8,800 on DK, $18 on FanDuel. For Felipe, he's 7,400 on DK and $12 on FanDuel.
Yeah, so we have Joshua Van, who's accepting fights all the time, and I love it. I love the activity. I love the volume from Van. I love the pace that he pushes, throwing 234 significant strikes against Zhalgas Zhumagulov, then throwing 300 significant strikes against Kevin Borjas. Kind of surprised that he scored as well as he did against Kevin Borjas in that bout, because it didn't look like he was going to be on a spectacular scoring, going to have a spectacular score in that bout, being priced at 9,200, but he did pay off at 106. Attempted 2 of 4 takedowns, landed 2 of them. So yeah, I think Joshua Van, despite accepting this fight on relatively short notice, is the guy I'm going to favor in the matchup. Felipe Bunes, he has some striking to him, but his skill set clearly resides in the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu realm. Very, very sneaky submissions off of his back. Can't have Joshua Van getting lackadaisical at all if it hits the mat. He needs to work his way back up. He needs to not get out scrambled. He cannot be put in a compromising position. I mean, Bunes has had a full camp. Joshua Van has had slightly an accelerated camp. So that's always something to take into consideration, especially when you have the person accepting the fight on short notice being priced at 8,800 and being the favorite. I think people just believe in the skill set of Joshua Van. Hopefully he's in shape. Hopefully he's prepared. I believe in the skill set as well. The hands look great. He digs to the body well. He looks like a guy on the rise for the flyweight division, and should pick up a victory here against Felipe Bunes as long as he is not put in a compromising grappling situation.
Yeah, I'm with you there on Van as well. I do like him to go out there and get the win, and man, it's massive ownership coming in over on DraftKings. So maybe, and of course, I just love rostering the first fight of the night.
Yeah, you love it, is right. And I'm sure you're going to be pivoting away from that.
I tell you, I found myself towards the end of last year. I was going with the first fight of the night, and like it either gets your night off to a great start or a really crappy start. It's one or the other. Yep. It can like get you off, say, hey, all right, but it's also when someone's got that kind of ownership, it's also something kind of scares me a little bit there. Let's get into our straight up fight picks here. These are non-DFS related, non-betting, just straight up here. Main event, I think is clear. It's got, for me, it's Ankalaev. Even though he missed weight and he didn't look great on the scale, I was watching the video when you were breaking down the fight, and he had that look of like, it almost seemed that it was that look of they just stopped the weight cut, and it was like, we're just going to take our fine, but I'm still going to say Manel Kape gets the job done. Yeah,
Manel Kape for me.
It's a coin flip fight for me, but I'll go Jim Miller.
I really hope so.
Give me underdog number 1 in Mario Bautista.
I respect it. I'm going to go with Ricky Simon, though.
Give me Brunno Ferreira.
Yeah, Brunno Ferreira for me.
I can't do it, bro. Cortes-Acosta. I mean, like, I can't trust Arlovski.
No, I am trusting Arlovski. I'm trusting the guy who's been around for 35 years, ignoring all the red flags. But yeah, give me Arlovski.
I'm going to go underdog number 2 in Preston Parsons.
All right. I'm on the opposite side. Big puncher, Semelsberger for me.
Give me McGhee. I'll go Basharat. Silva. Nolan. And Van. Let's hop over. And mention about prize picks. If there is a takedown prop that ends up getting put on Ankalaev, obviously I don't see they're going to put that 1.5 number out there again. I just want to refresh these lines just so they're the most accurate lines in terms of these projections that they have over there. Looking at takedown props right now, Basharat 3. I mean, it's a lot of takedowns. I mean,
if that hits 2.5, I'm doing it. But until that point, I think 4 takedowns in general So basically, you need one. Say it goes 15 minutes. You need one a round, and in one of those rounds, we need Lapilus to get back and have a mat return for Basharat. Clearly possible, but very ballsy.
Fantasy score, I would tell you, there's not a lot I love there. The one I would probably look at being a more than play, I think, would be Brunno at 77.5. I mean, look, he gets a finish in the first, second round. He's going to get past that number there. You look at fight time. I did like to know Kape when it was 14 3/4. Now 12.5. Don't love that as much there. Outside of that, not a lot that I love over there in terms of that. Then the significant strikes prop. I think the Ricky Simon 47.5. I would be looking at potentially as a more play there.
Interesting. Yeah, some of these weeks you find these Prize Picks props and they look appeasing, and it looks like Jason can get an edge on them because he's the Prize Picks master. But sometimes you just got to be able to recognize when it's not good lines.
Yeah, no doubt about it. We'll get some of the score questions before we get into the YouTube questions. First up, we got value plays underneath 8K on DraftKings.
Value plays under 8K on DraftKings. Well, it's Phil Hawes, but I mentioned all the stuff why I don't trust him.
Yeah.
Preston Parsons because of the takedown upside and submission upside. Bautista, I think, is the fighter in an actual competitive fight that I can agree with you on. Bolanos, if it becomes a kickboxing fight, highly unlikely it is, though. McGhee's smart. And then Arlovski, for me, just as a heavyweight punt, could just be a vet lesson against Waldo Cortes-Acosta.
Next question was about FanDuel cheapies. Not a ton that sticks out to me in terms of potential finishing abilities. I mean, I do look at the Ferreira and Hawes. I mean, they're both 16, 15, but just kind of looking at that 14 and below. Even though I like Ankalaev to win, Johnny Walker, he's got a punch chance, potentially could knock out Ankalaev, but I necessarily don't see that one happening there. Outside of that, maybe Bolanos at $12 is a cheapie to look at.
What's the prize for FanDuel now? Overall, 5,000, 10,000.
I don't think it's 10,000. I'm gonna try to log in here into my my FanDuel account and see what it exactly is. But yeah, I remember at the end of last year,
too low.
The prize pools were just so bad over there that it was.
I almost think esports has a higher one.
It was just one of those things of I was like, why am I playing at FanDuel? I used to love to play at FanDuel. Your big contest over there, 5,000 in first place.
Yep, pretty bad.
Yeah, and then your next highest is 200 to first place.
Almost at the point where we don't even have to talk about FanDuel anymore.
When I put something in to score, I thought about asking a question. Do you guys even want us to talk FanDuel?
I know there's a few people that play on FanDuel, but I mean, gosh, it's bad.
I do feel like if you're looking to get away from the DFF sharks on DraftKings, I think going to FanDuel is not a bad idea.
Yeah, you can play with you and your three friends, and that's about it. And besides that, it was almost disappointing. There was a couple of friends of the podcast that put out some tweets prior to them really launching the slate on DraftKings, and it was like low tournaments. And DraftKings caught wave of the complaints on Twitter or on X and ended up putting out actually good tournaments for this fight card. But up until the complaints, I mean, it was pretty bad out there. And we're like, what the heck, man? Everybody's been enjoying, DFS on DraftKings for MMA. And I think we've definitely brought a lot of people to it. And I think it's been good enough they shouldn't be diminishing the tournaments.
My guess would be is they're probably concerned that where they would fill it up. That just looking from a pure business aspect, that's where I would kind of think that maybe DraftKings is a little bit worried. And I'm sure they have a ton of analytics out there that tells them kind of what is a sweet spot in terms of these guaranteed prize pools out there. Core 3 plays on DraftKings. So this was a tough one for me, Pete, because as I was looking at the slate last night, I was like, man, who am I developing a lineup around?
Yeah, it's very hard.
I think for me, it was more developing a lineup based on salaries and fights. Like if we're just talking about from a GPP aspect, I was looking at Brunno and Phil was a fight that was kind of my starting point.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm not going to tell you 3 fighters that I really feel confident in just because I'm confident in them, but I don't feel like absolute flag plants about them. But it's the Semelsberger Parsons fight. I'm picking Semelsberger. It's the Brunno and Hawes fight. I'm picking Brunno. And it's the Jim Miller Benitez fight, and I'm picking Jim Miller. But just because I'm picking those guys doesn't mean I don't have the other side in different situations. But those 3 super 8,000 fights seem to have some of the best upside. And perhaps you pivot away from one of them, and then you bring Ricky Simón Bautista into the equation. Now you're talking about 4 incredible fights that we haven't even gone to 9,000 yet.
Yeah. Best leverage play. There's not a lot that sticks out to me in terms of leverage play. I mean, and the only thing I would point to is something that you say here on the show all the time. Underdogs in main event and co-main event.
Yep. I mean, looking
but,
like...
I mean, ownership's kind of very spread out. I mean, there's not like, I mean, the fighters that are underneath, 15% are the guys you expect to be under 15%.
Yeah.
By the way, we don't have a female matchup on this card.
I know. Yeah, no women's MMA. I do think for being a main event fighter, Johnny Walker's being completely overlooked. Mm-hmm. I totally agree with Ankalaev as the pick, but I mean, that ownership's either got to be wrong or just everybody's expecting Walker to get flatlined because Nicholas Mota should not have more ownership than Johnny Walker.
Yeah, I'm with you in terms of that one. Best takedown upside, I think it's I look at Ankalaev, but I think it's more of a question of can Walker get back up? I think that's a big one for me.
So takedown upside for me is Farid, Basharat, and Preston Parsons and Ricky Simón. I think those 3.
9K options available here for this one. So we got Ankalaev, Kape, Cortes-Acosta, McGhee, Silva, and Nolan. I think I still would say Silva's number 1.
Yeah.
But I think it's more about the opponent than anything else.
Yeah.
Outside, then I would probably go my number 2. I'd probably say Nolan 3, Ankalaev 4, McGhee 5, Manel 6, Cortes-Acosta.
I completely agree. Absolutely, to a T.
Best pump plays underneath 7,600. Well, I will say this: my pump plays start kind of at like 73 and below. But if you're looking under 7,600, Bolanos, Nicolau, and Cash, and then Walker.
Yep. So I kind of put Bolanos and Arlovski for cash underdogs because there is a chance that they win a decision, right? Pretty high chance that they can win a decision. Underdog who can actually score well with a big score, I think in that range under 7,600 is Johnny Walker. But I do think that like you have to understand what you're rostering. Expect a 0.
We'll wrap up here with some YouTube questions. Ryan says, for the 888 on FanDuel, who are we liking for top MVP and top value? I mean, look, Ankalaev is going to be very popular in terms of that. I understand that. I don't understand the popularity of Cortes-Acosta. That could be as much about betting against Arlovski. Of course, Gene Silva is going to be very popular there. I might look at Tom Nolan as a little bit of a kind of saving a little bit of ownership there.
Yeah, I like Tom Nolan. I do like him.
And then when it comes to value over there, if Bautista can stop the takedowns, I mean, there could be some value there at $13. Don't mind Jim Miller at $16. Obviously, either Brunno or Phil at 16 and 15 respectively would be ones that stick out to me.
I like it.
Okay. Next up here, who are the favorites for a first-round finish on the card? Gene Silva would be one that I would point to. Brunno would be another one that I would point to. And I think Nolan would be another one. Those would be my 3.
Yeah, it's clearly Gene Silva. It's clearly Nolan, and that's it for me. It's just two.
All right, we'll get to Sam's super chat here. He's got his usual questions here. Top 2 cash, top 2 GPP, top 2 underdogs. In terms of top 2 cash for me, I mean, the problem is I do like Gene Silva and Tom Nolan, but obviously that's going to take up a chunk of your salaries. Maybe you look at Brunno, Jim Miller. I mean, GPPs, yeah. I think you're looking at the Brunno fight, and I think the other one would probably be the Parsons fight.
Yeah, it's all about exposure to the correct fights for me. I mean, like, I think there's plenty of fights. Like, I'll probably be underweight to the flyweight bout between Kape and Matheus Nicolau. I'll probably be slightly underweight to the Van and Bunez fight. And then it's like, okay, which favorites am I going to be slightly underweight to? Going to be underweight to Waldo Cortes-Acosta. And then after that, it seems like game on. I'm going to be like ready to get exposure to everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, and also Sam asking about some underdogs. I mean, I look at Bautista, Hawes, Parsons would be probably my top 3 underdogs that I think have a chance to win.
Yeah, it's fair. I mean, like, there's a chance for everybody, but like in competitive fights, I think you're telling them who's in a competitive fight, and I would agree.
Yeah. Inside the distance fights, the main event, Miller, Benitez, Ferreira, Hawes, Silva, Wilson, Nolan, Mata, and I think you probably throw Van in there as well.
Ooh, interesting.
The Jason special, which I'm guessing he's referring to the first fight of the night. I do like Josh Van in that one, but I mean, it's the thing about that one is with Van being 8,800, there's some guys I want to get to that are have a higher salary than him, so it's more of a roster construction situation there. Pete's special. Oh, that's it. Your wonderful 8,000 fight.
Yeah, it's Jim Miller, man.
Yeah. Favorite parlays. I'm typically like a 2 to 3 leg parlay guy in MMA. That's kind of what I don't like to go more than that, just because I think once you get more than that, it's tough.
I think a Kape, Basharat, and Van parlay isn't bad.
Okay.
You know, it's like not the craziest odds, but you're also getting some 3 fighters that I feel decently about, and then you're avoiding some volatility. Obviously, in the Van, Kape, and Basharat fight, you're just hoping that Farid doesn't lose to a vet in Taylor Lapilus, that Kape can actually overcome an opponent he's lost to, and that Joshua Van can win a bout that he's accepted on relative short notice. But I think those 3, it's a unique parlay that I think has some security to it.
His over-under on finishes 8.5. I think that's a fairly good number there, Sam. I would probably still go under, though.
Yeah, less. 8.5. That's aggressive.
There's 4 fights I kind of label as, I think, high probability to go the distance there. Next up, Brian says, can we play Arlovski in the 888 on FanDuel for value? I mean, look, he's $9. I get getting the value. I think it's depending on if you're trying to get to those, multiple $20 and up fighters. I understand that, but I mean, that score could be really bad.
Yeah, it's mainly a DraftKings play.
Yeah,
because of how expensive the 9,000 options are.
Ryan says, for FanDuel, rank these values in order of priority. Parsons, Bautista, Arlovski need salary savings. I would go. I'd put it in that order. Parsons, Bautista, Arlovski. The reasons I would put Parsons above Bautista is I think if that fight, I just think that fight's going to be a finish. On one way or the other.
Yeah, I'd flip Bautista, Parsons, and then Arlovski.
Yeah. Rank your top 3 MVP and value plays on options. My top 3 for FanDuel. I will say this, in terms of FanDuel, I'm more looking at ownership and trying to get different over there. So, I mean, look, I understand why Ankalaev and Gene Silva are going to get high, but I think I'm looking at guys like Nolan, Joshua Van to try to get a little bit of an edge there on the crowd there. Let's see here. Next up, if you go 9,600 and you got to hope for some underdogs really hit and cash out, that's not a bad thought there. See here. Then he says some tough picks this week, but high risk is high reward. Yeah, I mean that's one of those things. And because I was thinking about this earlier today, we can kind of wrap on this. It's if you're playing on DraftKings and you're playing in those big contests, you just got to understand kind of who you're going up against, and understanding that if you're not a max entry player, you got to develop lineups based on how many entries you're putting in. I mean, I think that's one of the best advice. I mean, I will say this, when I play in those 150 maxes, and if I'm only putting, a small amount of entries in, I go kind of crazy.
Yeah, you have to. And also, like, you have to be willing to stomach rostering some pukey options. Like, you have to be like looking at your lineup saying, "Oh my God, I do not like this," because we're talking about a lower level UFC card. We're not talking about a UFC 299, a UFC 300, where you're getting incredible talent underneath 8,000 to 7,500.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, you have to be able to take some risks and take some shots when nobody else is willing to. That's why I'm okay with increasing more exposure than the 7 to 10% of Arlovski that the field has, just because nobody else is doing it. And I actually think that there's a world where it's a lot more competitive than what the odds suggest.
Yeah, that 299 card is absolutely stacked. If people have not seen what that card is going to be there, but
gross.
Of course, as always, we appreciate you tuning in for the Fight HQ podcast. We'll be here back next week. We got the pay-per-view next week. Of course, only 2 UFC events this month. Of course, you got the pay-per-view next week there in Toronto. So, Pete, anything you want to leave the people with?
No, I just want to say thanks, guys. Thanks for the support, reaching out to me on social media for my match. All the well wishes, much appreciated. You guys tuning in to us live is always appreciated. Sending super chats, liking, subscribing, talking in the Discord. It's pretty cool, and we really appreciate you guys. And let's kick 2024 off the right way, and let's take down some tournaments this week.
Yeah, I don't got a game till Monday, so I'm going to try to be to watch these fights here live tomorrow, and so I'll be in that Discord. Hopefully, and of course, and one of the things about being in Discord, guys like to share what their bets are, what they're playing DFS, and just having those conversations about what you're thinking. It's always great. Like, that's why I love when me and Pete disagree, because then I can kind of see where Pete's at, he can see where I'm at. Yeah. So we appreciate everyone tuning in. So that's going to do it for this episode of the Fight HQ podcast. We'll be back here next week as we'll preview UFC 297.